everyone. Yeah. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. And preschool education in the education sector is something that I believe is just coming off of age in the last few years. And there has been quite a considerable interest in this sector. And yet we see that there is a very cautious and a very though optimistic but yet very cautious approach when it comes to investments in this sector, and there have been quite a few changes. So we'll try. It's a huge subject that has been given to us. The ABCs literally mean everything, but we'll try and see where we can skim on some of the more important trends and some of the more important areas of interest to the audience here. So before I begin, I would like to start with some facts. I have been a journalist for 20 years, so this is what I do. The Indian preschool market was valued at $4.2 billion in 2022, and market research firm IMAC said that this sector will grow at a compound annual growth rate of 10% till 2032. So the little ones actually do mean big business. There can be many factors responsible for the growth. There has been quite a rise in disposable incomes, which has led to a change in the parental expectations. And this change is not just driven in the urban cities, but from tier 2, tier 3 towns, rural metros. We see that the entire spectrum of preschool education is changing. And apart from that, and the increased awareness, there is another factor which has been responsible for the growth so far, is that there has been little to no regulation from the government side. Of course, that is changing now. Without wasting much time on introductions, I'll just go on to the questions. So my first question is for you, Prerna. So in the last decade or so, we've seen so much change happening in the preschool education market. 20 years ago, it was, the entry of the branded preschools that changed the sector. But I think that in the last 10 years, technology, parental expectations, the disposable incomes, all of that has led to so much change. Can you tell us what are some of the most striking changes as somebody who has been in this sector that you have noticed?
So before we even talk about changes, firstly, thank you for the question. Before we even talk about the changes, the first thing that we need to think about is why is early childhood education important? I think each one of us has been very pressured that class 10 exam, board exams, IIT exams, we are all so worried about these exams. Nobody actually focuses on early childhood education. But the fact of the matter is that 90% of the brain gets developed before the child even turns 5 years old. 1 million neural connections are being formed per second when the child is in his early years. The most formative years of a child is actually during the early childhood education of the child. Any positive impact that the child is going through, the positive experiences the child is going through, leads to an extended lifelong journey of learning. And it impacts not just the learning of adulthood, but also a very strong foundation in primary school. And we talk about this gap in class 2, class 3, class 4, that children are not able to cope, children are struggling to cope. That's fundamentally because we have not put enough focus in early childhood education, the amount of focus that we should have as a country in the first place itself. Now, coming to your question on what is the changes or what is the evolution that we have seen in early childhood education, the first thing becomes that with the coming of dual income families, what has happened that people have started to rely on preschool to pass very good quality education. There has been urbanization, which has led to international curriculums coming into Singapore. NEP has come up with a very strong formal framework for the country today. Anganwadis are benefiting because of these curriculum frameworks that children are being exposed to in today's day and age. So a lot of development and focus now suddenly is taking place in the early childhood education. Obviously, as we all know, COVID hit. And once COVID hit, a lot of focus was on making sure that there is no learning gap in the grade 5 and above. But the actual learning gap was happening in early childhood education because there was not enough focus on technology, there was not enough focus on teacher training, there was not enough focus on child development, on what is the right thing for a child to do at the right age. But as soon as COVID hit, suddenly these key problems came to highlight and everybody started talking about it. Parents started to realize the importance of technology in early years. So with COVID, not only a great impact and a great improvement was seen in teacher training and technology advancement in early childhood, but also a significant improvement in parent involvement in their child's learning in the early years. So these were the benefits and the evolution that has happened over the last, I would say, decade or so.
Hi, Mridula. So while there's been a lot of, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
But there's been a lot of innovation in pedagogy, and the delivery. How have the curriculums themselves changed? And when we talk about parental expectations, the ASU report recently came out, and it spoke about, how preschool education sector has grown, and between 2018 and 24, and 77% of rural households now send a kid to preschools, and that's a huge change that has happened. And we were talking just before this, and you were talking about, how there's a change in expectations from the rural pockets, from even Tier 3, Tier 4 towns. So how does that compare with parental expectations in metros?
Yeah, thanks, Alifia. So yeah, we've been seeing, I think just before I answer that, adding to Prerna's, completely agree with the lack of importance that early education has had in the past. And yes, COVID did highlight that need so clearly with the number of schools that shut down for 700 days. I think India was the country that had the longest shutdown during COVID, 700 days of no school for a young child. We're still paying for that. We're still paying a price for that. So, and of course, there's a lot of research, and even James Heckman, who's a famous, renowned economist, has talked about just changing early education, how it completely changes the GDP of a country. It's that core, early education is that core to the entire country and its wellness. So that's, yeah, just adding on to that. And coming to your question, I think let's little understand what a curriculum is. It's sort of a plan for learning, and these are the learning outcomes expected, and hence your curriculum gets defined by that. I don't think the curriculum per se has changed much, the core curriculum. We still need to learn our numbers, still need to learn to form words, to spell. I don't think the core of it changes. What has evolved a lot, what we have been seeing is, changing a lot are the pedagogies, are the delivery models. We've had a lot of pedagogies which started many, many years ago, whether it's Montessori or Waldorf, or now there's inquiry-based curriculums. There are different ways of thinking that is evolving, that's changing with time. And a lot of people are either following just one of these, or they're blending many of these and coming up with a curriculum on their own. What has been evolving a lot are the delivery models. So traditionally it has been in school. Now we see tech-led models, we see teacher-led models to a large extent. So coming to the parent expectations, I think what we have seen, and we work with a lot of budget schools, we work with 1,700 schools, which are all mid or low budget. So I think I'm coming from a very different perspective from the premium end of the segment. We see parent expectations being very starkly different between the premium end and the other end of the spectrum. So what we see largely towards the premium end, there's a lot more, the evolutions are happening there. There's a lot more design thinking. There's a lot more thought process that's happening there. And more and more we see that parents at the higher end of the spectrum are leaning more into social learning, socio-emotional learning, and look at that as a route to learning, versus at the lower end of the spectrum, very firmly still entrenched in show me that my child can do maths, show me that my child can read English, and very core fundamental learning. Now, more than what parents expect, I think what should parents expect should be the better question to ask. What should they expect from a child? We all know brain development is phenomenal, as she just mentioned, below the age of 6, 8. It's just fabulous. child just left alone in a place where he or she is hearing 5 different languages, will just absorb it. So if that's the capacity of the child, what should we expect? So on both ends of the spectrum, we feel parents are not very clear about what to expect from their children, that they can do so much. So on the one hand, there's like no pressure, let them be stress-free and just socialization. On the other hand, they want learning, but they think counting 1 to 100 or reciting 1 to 100 is learning, which is not. That's not going to teach a child maths. So I think setting parent expectations on what can you expect from a child is important. And what's really missing, I think, on a national scheme of things, is the way we did a polio drop campaign. Do boond se bachta hai. Your child will get saved with that. I think just showing them that just get your child into school early, get the right quality early education, and your child's life is set. I think that should be the parent expectation.
You said that, you just talked about what should parents expect. And so as the parent to a 6-year-old, preschooler in that age, there's, very, debate that goes on amongst us, something that I just touched upon. And I would like to take that first before we talk about the business side of the preschool, sector. The integration of technology in preschools. Today, when you see preschools, there's a lot of talk about interactive learning, gamified learning. People are trying to sell us, models like, buy this app, this will help your child learn better. This is the visual memory is, is better, than rote learning and so many other things. But at the same time, as parents, we are bombarded with things like reduce screen time for your children, give less access to technology. There are so many mediums where on YouTube you can limit the number of hours, websites, not more than 40 minutes a day. Research bombards us every day. So as the parent to a 6-year-old, I want to ask you, which side of the technology spectrum, does the preschool learning fall? Is technology good or bad?
Yeah, I think that's very black and white. I would be very reluctant to take that route. But yeah, I will definitely answer your question on that. For us, in terms of we are school enablers at the end of the day, so it's coming from understanding that a child spends a large part of the day in school, and they're going to school to learn, specifically to learn. So school is the place where the child really needs to do their learning. At home should be like supplementary learning. Home is there for more of the emotional development, the social, but of course there's going to be some homework, some visual learning, and I think technology is here to stay, so you can't just say, no, let's just shut off all the gadgets and not expose the child. How much is debatable, and that's for different people, different stages. Where we look at it from is learning is a social process. Learning is not about absorbing content, it's about building skills. And if it's about building skills, it does happen in a group setting much better. That's why you have a school than it does happen at home. At home, you can definitely do some amount of practice, some amount of building up. Typically, you don't start learning from scratch at home unless they're life skills or socio-emotional learning. So I think this blending of people tend to look as learning as an academic process, and socio-emotional is different. I think learning is a social process is something that we're missing, and it's only when the two marry that you have a fully developed intellectual mind as well as a socially advanced child who's confident. It's not two ends of the spectrum. It needs to come together, and hence for me, technology would be only, I would say 10% supplemental learning. Main learning is schools are there for learning, so you need to go to school to learn, and then of course you can learn a little more in practice. I think schools miss practice time sometimes, and since especially in early years, different children have different paces. Some learn more, some learn less. You can make those up with some practice on gamified learning at home rather than just saying write the letter A 20 times, which is of no use at all. If you're doing a gamified version of that, it certainly helps to do the practice, but not the learning is how we look at it.
Prerna, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, I'm going to answer these questions with some examples actually. So the first thing is I want all of you to raise your hands. Can you imagine something when I say Sholay? All the people who can say hear Sholay and imagine something, raise your hands. Please raise your hands. Okay, everybody I think can imagine something when I say Sholay. How many of you can imagine the newspaper headlines 10 days ago? What was the newspaper headlines 10 days ago? Not a single person in this room has raised their hands. The simple point is that is the reason visual learning is important. 80% of our brain absorbs information when it is visually shown to us. The retention of that memory is far more than what we are reading. It is no different for children. When you are making them imagine a concept in math or English or whatever and telling them, read a book, read a book, read a book, you will just understand everything. You're just going against how we are built as human beings. We are built to visually see something and then imagine it in a concrete format versus just abstract imagination of things. That is the first reason why visual learning is so important, and interactive gamified learning help children. Second part why technology is important. In our country, the population of children below the age of 6 is 80 million children. And the number of trained preschool teachers is actually 1 million children. If we are able to support schools with technology, the gap of learning will be significantly reduced in our country because we don't have enough trained teachers. With the improvement of technology, we can even train our teachers better. Coming to gamified learning, I am fully with Mridula on this. I think the blended learning format is here to stay. It is not about just giving children screen time, mindless screen time, and saying कि मेरा बच्चा तो पढ़ लिया. Children are social learners. Children should be given a good balance of technology. And finally, we live in the Gen Z era. The technology that children will be growing up with in the next 20 years is not even invented today. So there is no way that you can take away screen or take away technology and say that, sorry, up to 20 years of age, you will not be exposed to technology. We have to expose them to technology, but in a healthy, secure environment where they don't misuse technology, but use it for a positive learning in their life, positive learning for improvement of early childhood education that they are going through.
Aditya, we've seen, some good deals happening in the preschool space. It started with Gaja Capital, Kedara, and we've also been seeing some interest now, with international preschool chains like Safari Kids and all showing interest in India. But it's not as much and to the scale of the other areas in the education sector. And I wanted to get an understanding of why this would be. Is this because there's a problem in scaling this business? It's ops heavy, location sensitive, teacher training takes considerable investment time. What are the problems with scaling this particular business? Why do we see this hesitancy?
Great. So I think you probably answered the question with all the list of problems. But there's a saying which says, riches lie in niches. So if you think about it, probably in this whole conference, the only domain which will not be disrupted by AI so meaningfully will be early childhood. It's the most boring business in the world, correct? Very operationally intensive. You can't have tech replace people at any point of time. So in that sense, while the interest in this room, by the sheer presence of people may look a little, but I can assure you, unlike everyone else who's figuring out where will they get disrupted next, this is actually one of those domains that you can easily build a $2 or $5 million business without being exceptionally good first. I think the tricky part is how do you scale this up from that $2 to $5 million number to like a 20, 50, $100 million number, which is where it's exciting for private equity investors, correct? It has been done before, so it's not that it's not been done before. I think it's only the starting of the curve in India. So lots to happen there. What will have to change is this lens of education saying, since I impart education, I come at a higher pedestal. That sadly is a very Indian mindset. Since I am a teacher, I am an entrepreneur in education, my purpose will drive everything. While it's great to have purpose, this profit orientation which is missing in our entrepreneurs, especially, and I think that's true across domains, is what is holding us back, and which is where I think private equity is such a big enabler, where they're able to think about the customer first, versus the educationist who's only thinking about learning outcomes all the time. So I think that disruption will happen, or let's not even call it disruption, but that lens of it being a service business where you're putting the customer first, the consumer first, will happen when private equity comes in. And they're coming in small volumes and downs, and they will make tons of money. Unlike the millions that go into trying to disrupt the whole world, I think this is, in that sense, a blue ocean. Some people will come, make disproportionate money, and move on. So that's my 2 cents.
I'll actually add to that. Funnily enough, I just sold my preschool business in Singapore to a private equity investor, just not even a couple of years ago, right? And I think the reason why it is happening overseas, because my business was based out of Singapore, why it is happening so much overseas and not happening so much in India is because so far early childhood as an industry has been very unstructured and unorganized. Very few big brands have come in and set up something that crosses the entire country of India. So it is a huge opportunity and backed by the right people. And if we are able to bring the right quality into the country, there will be no dearth of private equity investors. It is just about getting to that scale and getting a few people IPO. The moment 5 big people IPO, the whole industry will start aspiring to something different.
When you spoke about unstructured and unorganized, there's another un that comes to my head, and that is unregularized. So for a very large time, period of time, preschool education didn't really come under the purview of the Education Ministry. The Right to Education Act talks about education, fundamental education, beginning from the age 6, which is grade 1 onwards. It's only recently now that we've started talking about foundation skills in literacy, numeracy, Nipun Bharat coming on the picture where, they're talking about children from age 3 onwards, that we are starting to see interest and, participation from the government as well, which does not look at preschool education as just daycare centers or Anganwadi, but a very serious enabler of foundational learning skills. But while we see this, is there 2 ways of looking at it? One, does it bring some more legitimacy, respect, a different perception to this entire business? At the same time, for private equity firms, how do they look at it? Because, for them, until now, this was a sector which was more or less unregulated. There was, of course, a concerted effort to pass a law at the central level, which hasn't come. But state governments have been, now in the last recent years, from New Delhi to Karnataka, they have been, now coming up with their own regulations. So does that hinder, the prospects as well? So both sides, perception as well as interest from private equity. Mridula and Aditya. Aditya, would you like to take that first?
Yeah, great. So I think formalization helps. And I know while we are saying the word private equity very often, I think it only means formal investors coming into the business, correct? Where an entrepreneur says, this will be worth my time. So I think anything by the government which brings structure to the business is always encouraging, because unlike spaces which are run amok by unorganized sector, this is actually your first opportunity at consolidation, formalization, and which is why it'll make it more attractive for investors to come in at. So I only see positives. Obviously, there are these small downsides of being regulated. But I think as Indian entrepreneurs, we have enough ways to manage. I think we do it on a day-to-day basis. Best to have it under structure versus not have the structure and have people run amok. So those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree completely with what Aditya is saying. And also, I think at the end of the day, we're here in India to solve a problem at scale, right? At the end of the day, there's a learning problem which is very, very large, massive. And I think the idea is to bring the cost of education down at the end of the day, and market models will lead to that. Regulation comes and goes. We've seen different states bringing in different regulations. They also withdraw because right now the state is not in a position to deliver that kind of quality education that the market needs. And it is up to the private players at the end of the day to deliver that, whether they're chains, whether they're small entrepreneurs. And like he said, we have jugaad in our blood. We have seen entrepreneurs in the smallest of cities running wonderful preschools, bringing education, maybe not to 100% level, to a 20, 30, 40, and they grow by the day. So it's about making markets more inclusive, bringing every child into the purview of learning, and we have like a massive market size. That's our advantage, is the scale that we have in India. Like she said, I think there are about 15 to 20 crore of children just under the age of 6, and half of them are not in a good school. even if they are in school. So bringing that quality education, I think one of the things that we are looking at, as scale, how do you solve this problem? How do you make it affordable yet profitable? As he said, we need to look at institutions becoming profitable. And I think preschools are one of the most profitable businesses, and not many people do see that. We do a lot of play-based learning, and play-based learning has this power of bringing, changing learning from a teacher-led model to a child-led model, where there's self-learning, and everybody knows play-based learning is one of the best ways of learning. It cuts away all the costs, the frills, and now you can have 50 children learn at a lower cost, because at early years, play is the best way of learning, and the teachers just need to be supporting that. They don't need to be leading the learning. So I think the profitability element, which is very, very critical, is something that I think the PE players do see. It's not that they don't see. I see a lot of people do understand. Some of our preschools get profitable in 7 months from the day they start. You just need to get to 30 children, and then you're profitable if you're not paying excessive rent or excessive royalty. You still manage. Even if you're paying a royalty, you still break even at, say, about 40, 50 children. So it is encouraging a lot of small entrepreneurs. It's a SME business at its heart. And I think we'll see more aggregators who are putting these all together, rather than, you don't need to run the chain. You can have aggregate players like us, and there are many others who enable all these schools. So yeah, it's a super profitable business, and I think the industry will see it soon.
We have just less than a minute to go, but while we're talking about profit, schools typically run under the not-for-profit model, but and preschools until now were allowed to be established as for-profit model, right? Now with more interest from regulatory factors, do you see that aspect or that attractiveness of preschools getting affected as more and more regulatory interest is shown in the preschool market?
Yeah. Since we're a little short on time, I think the answer, is no. Just like K-12 schools have figured out a way, preschools will. So in my own head, it's not going to be like a very big challenge. Guys, keep in mind that we speak about education as this, the whole bandwidth, and we've been speaking about big numbers today, correct? Early childhood is about the first 4-5 years of a child's life. Postgrad is also about 3-4 years of a child's life. Actually, that funnel becomes smaller as you go upwards, correct? So the funnel is the broadest at the bottom, and the interest seems to be the lowest, correct? Because just it's operationally intensive. So keep in mind when you think about opportunities, I think early childhood in that sense is just an amazing opportunity to be a part of. Not that, by the way, I'm selling preschool businesses, but just kind of making you realize that if the upper funnel is attractive, guys, at the bottom, everyone sits there, correct? Each of these child, some of them will only go to higher education, not all of them. That's
Okay,
it from me.
since we should have a closing remark, I'm just going to leave this at, give me 2 words on what each of you think is going to be the future of the, the key thing which will shape the future of the preschool business in India. 2 words.
First, play-based learning, I think it's non-debatable for me. So play-based learning will change completely the way the models are evolving, and that will move to more towards practical learning, sort of leading the way rather than theoretical learning, especially in early years.
Prerna?
Technology and teacher training. We need teacher training in our country to deliver any model, whether it is play-based, it is technology-based, it is child-led. We need teacher training, we need good, high-quality teachers, and we need good, high-quality technology.
Aditya?
I think teacher training is extremely critical to scale this up. I think everything else will solve, but teacher training, 2 words.
Thank you.